Have you watched Attack of the Clones and wondered, what's Jango Fett's story? He is one of the best parts of that movie. His introduction gave Boba Fett his own backstory, but created a need for another. Today we're going to tell that tale, the tale of Jango Fett. I've taken the stories from the Jango Fett Open Seasons comics and the Bounty Hunter video game and expanded on them to make them fit better into the new canon story of Boba Fett himself. This chapter 16 of Jango Fett's origin story. Hi, I'm Gerald, and I'm a Star Wars fanatic. Welcome back to my channel. Before I move on with the story, if you're new to my channel, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all my Mandalorian, Boba Fett, and Jango Fett theories, stories, and discussions. And check out my other videos linked in the description below. It's time to join the fastest growing Star Wars channel around. This story is meant to be heard, so please excuse the visuals. Now, on with the story. Unidentified craft, state your business with Mandalore. The voice called out over Jango Fett's open comms channel. This is Mandalore Fett, requesting landing clearance. Jango knew that his duty was to the Mandalorian people. The Civil War was over and Death Watch was eliminated. But for some reason, this didn't feel like home. He was so used to moving around and hiding that the thought of settling down in one place was unnerving. Nevertheless, the war was over, and he had to find a way to lead his people without bias. There was an awkward silence from the air traffic dispatcher, and Jango had a bad feeling about this. His first intuition was to turn and run. He would try to contact Adonai Kreese from abroad. After a silence that seemed like an eternity, the dispatcher answered, "Transmit your clearance code." The last time Jango had visited Mandalore, he wasn't asked for a clearance code. Something was off about this, but he couldn't back away now. His sister was somewhere on the surface, and he had to check on her. He didn't think of himself as a returning champion. He was just a simple man trying to make his way home to honor the Rezulnari and his people. A people he was adopted into but fought for like they were his blood. He responded to the dispatcher. "I am Jango Fett, Mandalore, and leader of all clans of Mandalore. Name a landing platform and your security detail can meet me there." Just then, a familiar face appeared in a hollow transmission. It was Satine Kreese, daughter of Duke Adonai Kreese. "Mandalore Fett, I was told you had been killed in the war with Death Watch. It's good to see that was false information. Proceed to LP-94. The transmission then ended abruptly. Satine turns to see the hand of Almec had just pressed the end transmission switch. "Prime Minister, what are you doing? How dare you disrespect me and our Mandalore in such a way?" Almec then replied, "Forgive me, madam, but this could be a trap. Jango Fett is no Mandalore. He isn't even a Mandalorian. How do we know he doesn't have men aboard that monstrous ship, ready to strike our own defenses?" Satine responded, "With all due respect, Prime Minister Almec, Jango Fett has never given us reason to think he's anything but genuine." Almec then disputes the claim. "I beg your pardon, miss, but wasn't he just entangled in a war for power of Mandalore? This Darmanda cannot be trusted." Satine became stern in her appearance and voice. "Almec, you will listen closely. Jango Fett is every bit Mandalorian as you and I. The Creed protects foundlings raised as Mandalorians. He has fought for Mandalore and rallied behind our leader. Maybe we could all learn something from him." Almec understood a diplomatic jab at him when he heard one, and his face turned visibly angry. "Yes, of course, madam." Both Prime Minister Almec and Duchess Satine Kreese watched through the viewport of Satine's office as Jango Fett's oddly shaped ship finishes its landing approach. "Duchess, you have to admit, he is unconventional." Satine looks back at him from over her shoulder. "Easy, Almec. We don't know what he has been through. Take your security detail to the landing pad and escort our Mandalore wherever he needs to go. I'm sure his sister, Arla, will be on his mind." Almec starts to protest, but realizes he's outranked and there would be no point. He will have to figure out another means to show his disdain for the returning Darmanda Mandalore and be rid of him. But he had to be careful. If he planned to get rid of Jango Fett, it meant he would have to convince Jango that it was his idea to leave peaceably. Otherwise, Satine would surely know it was Almec, and it could cause unrest. There was a lot that had to be figured out and planned, but Almec knew the more detailed the plan, the more variables that could go wrong. It had to be simple, But nothing was simple anymore, not without his Mandalore, Tor Vizsla, even though he knew of a remnant of Death Watch being led by Tor's nephew, Pre-Vizsla, was somewhere in hiding out there. He didn't know if he could even find him from the confines of Mandalore, let alone trust the young hot-headed to be discreet. For now, Prime Minister Almec would have to go it alone, just as he did with Adonai Kreese. Even he knew he was lucky not to be discovered on that one. Now, he had to play nice until an opportunity presented itself. So he took his time heading to the odd-shaped ship the fake Mandalore had arrived on, hailing the head of security on the comms to meet him at the halfway point. Jango finished his post-flight checks once his new ship was safely on the ground. As he released his flight harness, he noted that a rather large crowd had gathered around his landing pad. This was quite different than his last visit to Mandalore. Everyone was smiling and cheering. This made Jango nervous. He was a man born of war, a Mandalorian made from war, and a Mandalore who would only lead in war. It wasn't nervousness like that feeling just before a battle, but it was close. More anxiousness than anything. He felt sweat bead up on his brow and under his armored flight suit. This was bad. If he was this paranoid before even interacting with his people, how would he be when he had to maintain their loyalty? Then the thought entered his mind. Politics. Ugh. In his abilities in battle, Jango Fett had every confidence in his skills. Politics? There was no politics in war, only victory or death. There was honor in dying for your men and your cause. There was no honor in manipulating masses. And that's what politics was to him, manipulation. He didn't have fancy words or speeches like Adonai, and he didn't have the self-centered way of being opportunistic as Almec seemed to have. He was a Mandalorian cut from the same cloth as his adoptive father, Jaster Muriel, and a simple man, like his father on Concord Dawn. He trained himself to move his thoughts along. Maybe now there's peace. Things will be different. Do Mandalorians even understand peace? All he knew was he just wanted to lead his people as a strong warrior at their side, not in front of them, not sway public opinion, nor bow to bureaucracy. As he pressed the button to open the rear gangplank, he realized his return may be seen as something special. Suddenly, he felt just how Mandalore the Great must have felt as he returned from fighting the Jedi. Jango Fett had fought the Jedi and knew it wasn't an easy feat to be victorious. But was he really victorious against Master Dooku and his dogmatic cohorts? Well, he survived, and he felt some guilt for that. But he could reconcile his emotions knowing that his true Mandalorians died with honor. Jaster had taught Jango that being the Mandalore meant more than just leading the people. It meant understanding that Mandalorians were meant to die in battle for their Mandalore. It was the job of the Mandalore to lead them, perhaps even die beside them. Survive if he could, but only as an honorable leader. And Jango was honorable. He didn't run away. He faced the Jedi head-on and even killed 6 of them with his bare hands. He didn't know how much more honorable his own capture could have been. The rear gangplank of the Firespray 31 extended fully. The door then slid open, revealing the entire mass of people that had gathered to welcome the new Mandalore home. But they didn't look excited to see him, as he had noted earlier. The cheers he had seen earlier from his cockpit weren't cheers at all, but rather protest. In fact, the more he paid attention, the more he noticed and felt their disappointment, maybe even anger. Then, a familiar face. Not particularly a friendly one, but familiar nonetheless. It was Almec. Jango kept telling himself, "Be humble, they don't know you." Almec approached wearing full armor and decoration. The black and gold coloring was striking against the virtual gray that surrounded them. Jango proceeded toward Almec. "Protector Almec, it's good to see you are well." Almec stopped. "It's Prime Minister, actually." Jango wasn't well versed in politics or political positions, but he knew he had never heard of a Prime Minister of Mandalore. But it wasn't in him to ruffle feathers in his first minutes of returning to what would be his home. Jango apologized, but Almec said nothing in return. Jango kept the pace with Almec as they brushed through this sea of people. Jango asked Almec, "Why does my return feel so hostile?" Almec then stopped walking in the middle of the crowd and spoke loud enough for the horde to hear him. Because your being here is hostile. Because you murdered to get your position. They only know one thing about you. You are a murderer. Just then Jango could hear the whispers of the crowd. Murderer. Illegitimate. Go back to where you belong. This wasn't a welcoming crowd at all. Almec could feel himself smile beneath his helmet as they began walking again. I trust you would like to see your sister, Arla? Jango nodded. That is one of my priorities, but I'd like to see Duke Adonai Kreese first. Again, Almec stopped in his tracks and turned to Jango, and yet again, speaking so all could hear. Duke Adonai Kreese has been missing since you were here last. In fact, he went missing around the time you left Mandalore to go pillaging. That made the crowd grow louder with more chanting. Jango grabbed Almec by the arm to get him moving again. This was beyond uncomfortable. Almec reacted, Unhand me, Darmanda. Jango Fett was fluent in Mandoa. It was the official language of the Mandalorians, and to be a Mandalorian, one of the pillars of their society was to speak the language. It wasn't a way of showing superiority throughout the galaxy, but a way of uniting the Mandalorian people and connecting them. The language also separated Mandalorians from other societies in the galaxy, as Mandalore had a certain anonymity. So, Jango understood what Almec was calling him, a non-Mandalorian, soulless, unworthy to be seen before the gods. This is the biggest insult a Mandalorian could receive. No one dared call one another Darmanda among the true Mandalorians. If they had, it was grounds for immediate execution. They were brothers and sisters all, Nervode. Jango didn't expect bows and praise upon arriving on Mandalore, nor did he want it. But he surely wasn't ready for this, and it would not be taken lightly. Jango stiffened his back and called to the guards. Protectors, take this man under arrest. I want him placed in a cell until further orders from only myself. The guards hesitated, but did what they were commanded. Almec struggled for a moment. This will not go unpunished, Fett. When placing a Mandalorian under arrest, the detained are stripped of all armor and decoration until the Mandalore passes a sentence. And the Mandalore can free them if he is feeling particularly kind. But in this case, the first thought that came to Jango Fett was execution. As Almec was being bound, he looked Jango in his masked face. You will pay for this, farm boy. Jango showed a bit of confidence. Take him away. Then, just like that, Almec was hauled away by the guards. Jango then paused at the far edge of the crowd. He wasn't going to be treated like an outsider on the world he was left to lead. Listen up. Everyone was silent. I am Jango Fett, son of Jaster Muriel, of the true Mandalorians. The same true Mandalorians who fought to end the Civil Wars. We accomplished that goal. All my men died in battle to protect you. I fought beside them. I know you've been without a resident Mandalore for some time. That changes now. I'm here to serve you, but I will not tolerate Mandalorians belittling one another. There is a whole galaxy out there that is looking to destroy us, with the biggest threat being the Jedi. If we do not stand for each other, they will come in and tear us apart. Live like Mandalorians, fight like Mandalorians, and die like Mandalorians, as one. Jango knew he wasn't the best motivational speaker, but he had hoped he got his point across. As he walked away from the crowd, he didn't hear any more grumbling, but he could still feel the tension. Oh well, he thought, he can't make everyone happy. Maybe through his actions they'll come to trust him. He addressed the remaining guards without looking at them, assuming Almec had filled their ears with rubbish. Take me to Satine Kreese now. The guards acknowledged his command. The captain responded, Right this way, Mandalore Fett, as he gestured the direction with his hand. Maybe he had gotten through to them, or maybe the captain just understood his duty. Either way, it was a nice change of attitude. The question of what to do with Almec was in the back of Jango's mind, at least until he spoke with Satine. So much had changed on Mandalore since his last visit, but if there was anyone he could trust, it would be Satine Kreese. She was always kind and respectful toward Jango. Yes, his sister's well-being was a priority, but he had to make sure he wasn't going to be assassinated when out and about. As Jango walked through the palace, he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. The way the architecture was, and the decor. The Iron Heart was present in all of it. Why hadn't he noticed that years ago when he was on Mandalore? It was striking to him. He was but a warrior, but the Iron Heart means so much to the warriors of Mandalore. Now it seems watered down, diluted. Do these pacifists even understand what the Iron Heart represents? So much about this new Mandalorian society felt off. He felt the vulnerability of the Mandalorian culture. If any trained army knew of this new way of pacifism, it would be easy to purge this planet. The door slid open to a palace office. Jango could see that inside stood Satine, a welcome presence for sure. She had her back to the door and was looking out the window on the opposite side of the room. Without turning around, Satine spoke. "It doesn't look like you got a warm reception." "My apologies, Mandalore Fett." Jango answered. "Please, call me Jango." Satine answered back. "As you wish, Jango. You may address me as Duchess Satine." He could feel the chill coming from her words. Yes, so much has changed with Mandalore. I didn't expect a warm welcome. They don't know me. Satine continued staring out the window. "I thought your first course of action would be to visit your sister, not arrest our Prime Minister." "With all due respect, Duchess, for the attitude Almec gives, his name does not ring a bell on the battlefield. He did not answer the call of his Mandalore, yet he calls me a Darmanda. That can't be tolerated." Jango joined Satine at the window as she responded to his claims. "Prime Minister Almec doesn't see you as his Mandalore. He's very much a purist." Jango saw that she was looking directly at Jango's ship. Had she been watching the whole time? "I wasn't talking about the call from me. I was talking about when Jaster Muriel, my Mandalore, put out the call to all Mandalorians to assist in the fight against Death Watch. I didn't bother putting out the call because few Mandalorians answered the first request." Satine then turned to Jango. "Peculiar ship you have there. What happened to the Fang fighters and gauntlets we sent with you?" Jango was taken aback. She was ignoring his statement. "They did their jobs. They fought with honor. They died with honor." Satine then gave a smirk. "Strange that you didn't die with honor with them. Don't misunderstand me. I'm grateful that our Mandalore survived. But just because you feel war is valid and justifies the deaths of so many, doesn't mean everyone else feels the same." Jango paused. This felt like politics. Ugh. "To answer the Mandalore call is the duty of all Mandalorians. Perhaps the war would have ended much sooner, and fewer lives would have been lost if more would have followed their honor, rather than cowering behind a fake political system." This made Satine visibly angry. "Jango, I will not sit by and have you insult my ideals while you wear that symbol of war over your face. Ashamed to show your face to your people. And whether they or I like you or not, we are your people." Jango then faced Satine. "A Mandalore is not to remove their helmet in the presence of anyone, accepting the role of Mandalore." Satine smiled. "Role? Not title?" "Thank you, Mandalore Fett. I and my staff are at your service. Let me show you to your office. Then we'll go see Arla. I have been monitoring her since you left." Jango had stood his ground and not caved to Satine. Yes, she had been raised in politics, but she understood her place, so it seemed. As Jango and Satine walked the corridors of the palace, Satine asked Jango, "Mandalore Fett, what are your intentions with Prime Minister Almec?" Jango thought for a moment. "My first thought was execution. To call someone a Darmanda is beyond forgivable." Satine stopped cold. "Execution? That's unreasonable. Prison is acceptable, even exile, but execution? You have to lose your barbarian ways. This is a new Mandalore." Jango stopped and calmly responded, "Perhaps I should sell Almec to the Zygarians? He wouldn't be the first I have given to the slavers." Jango knew what was an empty threat. He hated the slave trade. It was a dishonorable way to put a man through that. You should just kill them. The governor of Galadran was different. He had sold Jango to the Pike Syndicate and displayed Jango's and Jaster's armor as if it were some kind of trophy. He was a coward, hid beneath his desk while the fighting went on. He deserved slavery. The governor was no man. Satine stared intently. Zygarians should lose their operations and have them dismantled. Jango chuckled. Satine spoke. Almec is a traditionalist. He believes to be a Mandalorian, you must be born a Mandalorian. It isn't right, but that's how he is. Jango stopped mocking Satine. If Almec agrees to follow the Rezulnari, I will forego a sentence. But I will let him sit in the cell for a while to think about what he's done. Satine grins. I'm sure I can persuade him to change his point of view slightly. He's a great Mandalorian and only has our society's best interest at heart. Jango acknowledged. See it to it that he understands. Just then, Satine turned a hard right and stopped in front of a control panel to the right of a lavish door. The door was adorned with gold inlay on a red door with yet another large iron heart. She then pressed a button on the control panel. The door swooshed open down into the floor. Satine stepped in and gestured for Jango to join her. This is your office. It's been some time since a Mandalore was here to use this room. Room was an understatement. It was bigger than Hondo Ohnaka's command ship, or at least it seemed that way. Why do I need this? Forgive me, Mandalore Fett. This is a place you can retreat, or meet with advisors, or hold meetings, make laws. Jango cut her off. This is all new to me. The only meetings I had were to make a battle plan. If this is a room that I can draft laws, then let me dictate my first to you, here and now. Satine looked confused. How dare he come right in and start making laws and changing their society? Very well. Jango got behind the desk, but didn't touch it. Instead, he looked out the window and could see his ship. Satine walked over to him and saw what he was looking at, possibly reminiscing a simpler role in battle. What do you call your ship? Jango then stood firm. His spine would stiffen when what he was about to say should be paid attention to. He didn't realize he had even done it. Slave 1, he said calmly. She's dedicated to my years in slavery under the Pike Syndicate, and my hopes that the Jedi Order pay for putting me there. Satine felt the sadness coming from Jango, such a strong warrior, who she imagined had a tear-filled eye under his helmet. What is your decree, my Mandalore? Quickly changing the subject, Jango snapped out of his trance. The position of Prime Minister is terminated. I am here now. Satine cut him off. You don't need to give me a reason. Your word is the law. Jango then stiffened his back again. I was about to say, we don't need 3 leaders. As an offer of good faith, Almec can remain on as council member. Once he serves his time, for his comments, of course. Satine looked surprised. This is a good gesture on your part, and I'm sure Almec will see you as a forgiving leader. And your other law? Jango loosened up a bit. There are remnants of Death Watch that have survived. These are Mandalorian warriors that fought for a cause they believed in. They are not to be treated as enemies. They were just misguided. Their leader Tor Vizsla's dead, and so is most of the rest of their leadership. They may return to Mandalore. Satine had something to say about this. Do you think that's wise? There are most likely more of them than there are of you. Our guard would not be able to protect you at all times. Jango interrupted her. This isn't about me. This is about healing Mandalore. Make it happen. Satine nodded. Yes, sir. The two left the Mandalore's chamber and began walking again. This time their destination was a better circumstance. They were off to reunite Jango with his sister, Arla Fett. He hadn't seen her since he left her in the care of Satine and her staff. It was going to be so nice to see a friendly face. The pair entered the private hangar beneath the palace and boarded a transport platform. They constantly had guards with them. The platform took them to another transport. This one was meant for longer travel. Jango asked Satine, Where are you taking me? My sister lives in Sundari. Satine looked annoyed. Not anymore. A great number of things have changed since you were on Mandalore last. Mandalore Fett. Jango shook his head slightly. I see that. Outside the capital city of Sundari, Mandalore was desolate. The ground was dry and cracked, and nothing could grow. A history of war made sure of that. The dome around Sundari allowed for an ecosystem that permitted plant and animal life to flourish. The architecture of the city was also built in a way that natural resources could be incorporated into the very workings of the cubed city structures. Nature and progress together as one to ensure the survival of all life contained within. However, outside the biome was another story. Nothing could survive out here for long. so Jango wondered why they were going out there. Surely Arla would not have chosen this place to live her life. Arla was a warrior, a damn good one. She would be helpful on Jango's council. Beside that, he wanted her close to him, and this was not close at all. It seemed odd to Jango that Satine would travel with him this far out, this far away from all the security of the biome. They had their small security detail, but it didn't seem normal for a high-ranking official such as Satine to be out and about in the open. It was more of a warrior instinct to not worry about that sort of thing. It made him respect her a little more. She had a warrior inside of her, but something had to have happened for her to lock it away. That meant one of two things. Either she would be a bit easier to convince that the Super Commando Codex is the future of Mandalore, or there will be no way in hell she will agree to anything that even remotely resembles a return to warrior culture. But the way Jango sees it, it isn't her choice. It's the Mandalorian way. What's the worst that could happen? Another civil war? Possibly, and Jango doesn't have the troops nor resources to fight another one. Just then, Jango remembers. How is the child of me Regan? Corky, is it? Satine's shown a huge lit smile. He's such an amazing boy. He's almost 3 and won't stop talking. He's staying with a close friend of mine for a few days while I get you adjusted. I can already tell he has his mother's curiosity, but my stubbornness. Then she asked something Jango didn't expect. Did my sister die with honor? And Jango saw a tear run down her cheek. She was one of my best warriors. I could rely on her for anything. Your sister died with honor in battle on Cortus 6. We weren't expecting a battle, but Death Watch was waiting. She was ambushed and murdered. Your loss was not in vain. Count Dooku paces his office in the capital of Serenno. It had been almost a generation since he began returning home, killing his traitorous brother and eventually taking the family crest. Frustrated, Dooku feels like he's getting nowhere. He wasn't an impatient man, and he knew how to play the long game, but he had learned so much about galactic politics in the 2 years he had left the Jedi Order, and this was slow for even the Republic. Hell, it was even quicker to deal with the Jedi Council and their own internal politics. If you weren't absolutely the top in the eyes of the Jedi Council, you would see yourself stuck on an Outer Rim world handling bar fights and land disputes. The last straw was when the Jedi Order wouldn't try to convince the Republic to help his planet. No matter, he didn't need either of them now. He had been doing it alone for long enough, and Serenno was back to being a wealthy, independent system. As independent as it could be, anyway. Regulations were choking them. Dooku wasn't one for reminiscing the old days, but once in a while he would walk over to the glass case where he kept his lightsaber and wonder if he would ever need to use it again. He hadn't touched it since he had been home, but he did miss the feeling of power it gave him to ignite the blade. Power, something a Jedi shouldn't crave. But Count Dooku was no longer a Jedi. The Jedi Order was as worthless to him as the Galactic Senate. Maybe he was too deep in his head. His world was prospering without the help of any outsiders. But the outsiders didn't mind buying his resources. So if he stopped all communication with the Republic, they would stop buying his resources and just take it through occupation. He was stuck. Maybe he should take up the Senator of Naboo on his advice to meet with other worlds in the same predicament. But Naboo, the shining star outside of Coruscant itself, the epitome of class warfare. He thought to himself, you can't trust anyone from Naboo to have anyone other than Naboo's best interest at heart. He had not discounted the newer senator yet, though, only because he assured Dooku that another Jedi was as frustrated as he had been, his old friend Sifo-Dyas. As much as Dooku held Sifo-Dyas in great regard, it was mostly due to the feeling more like a protective big brother to the Jedi when they were in training and sent on missions together. Dyas was a loose cannon with mental issues that had been covered up for a long time. Still, the advice from the senator was tempting. Count Dooku had been doing this alone for long enough. It would be nice to have someone on his side that was also feeling frustrated with the Jedi Order and galactic politics, especially someone still inside. He makes the decision it's time to call Senator Palpatine back. In the distance, Jango could see a small dome in the middle of the wasteland. This couldn't be where Arla chose to live, he thought to himself. He had remembered her as an adventurer, but this was a little extreme. Maybe there was a lot he didn't know about her now. He didn't get to spend much time with her since they reunited last. And what little time they did spend together, he was either busy making plans with his men, or she wasn't well enough for catching up. He still felt responsible for leaving her to be captured by Tor Vizsla. But he's here now, and so is she. As the small transport landed, the guards exited first and formed two lines on either side of the shuttle's ramp. 6 men in all. To Jango, this seemed like overkill. He was all the protection they needed. Once the guards were in place, Satine and Jango exited the vehicle and made their way to the entrance of the dome. No more than an acre in size. Once inside, it was actually something to behold. Most of the interior was lined with crops, a desolate land made fertile. At the far end was a small homestead. But before they made it to the entrance of the home, Satine stopped Jango. "Mandalore, just remember, your sister has been through a lot. She may not be as you remember her, if she even remembers you at all." Jango felt anger fill his blood. "This is something you could have told me on the long ride over here. Why wait until I'm almost in view of her?" Satine felt sad. "I didn't know how to explain it if you had questions. Alpha's here tending to her. He'll be better equipped to answer your questions. I'm sorry, I had to keep it from you." Jango felt impatient and picked up speed as he headed to the door. But before he could reach the first control panel, the door slid open and Alpha walked out. "Mandalore Fett, it is good to see you are well." Jango was growing more impatient with every moment. "Where's my sister? Where's Arla?" The droid glanced at Satine, acknowledging that she had not told Jango everything. "Your sister is inside, sir, but I have to warn you, she isn't the same. She fell ill when you left and has been barely speaking since then. We moved her out here away from the pollution and noise." Jango felt a tear fill his eye. How could that be? When I left, she was recovering from her surgery. You told me it was a success. If a hollowed-eyed droid could ever give a look of sorrow, this would be that time. The surgery was a success. However, she has another condition, something underlying that can't be identified. It isn't tied to the head injury she sustained. Jango was fuming at this point. That droid had every upgrade to his database known. An unknown underlying condition? How? "Take me to Arla now." The droid hesitated. "I understand you're upset, Master Fett, but raising your voice will only startle her, and it will take days for her to recover from that impact. That's why she's out here." Reluctantly, Jango held his anger in, something he'd grown accustomed to in recent days. When Jango saw Arla, she looked healthy. Well, as healthy as she could look. She was sitting in a chair, her armor hanging behind her, as if she were ready to put it on at any moment. When Arla noticed Jango standing in the doorway, she barely reacted. A slight smile was all she gave, and it looked like it was painful to even move that much. Jango ran over to her and knelt down beside her. He took her hand. This moment reminded him of when she lay unconscious on the medical table before her operation. "How do we keep meeting like this, Arla?" Another painful smile cracked the corners of her mouth. She put her hand down on top of Jango's, which was gripping her hand so tight that it was turning white. She rubbed his hand for a moment, then moved it to his stubbled cheek. Oddly, he felt calm. No more anger. Even though Arla didn't speak a word to him, he knew what she was saying. For the next hour, he talked to Arla with no response. He told her everything he had been through and that all he could think of was getting back to check on her. If it weren't for her, he may not have pushed on at all. He told her of how Mandalore wasn't the same and that he didn't know if he could do it. Arla just looked at him, and her eyes told him that she believed he could. At the end of their conversation, he promised her he would return soon, that he would find a cure for her and bring her back to live with him in Sundari. Again, Arla smiled slightly. Arla could almost feel the words come out of her mouth, but they just didn't. Words of encouragement and love, pride in her brother and what he's become, but most of all, she wanted to tell him to stop worrying about her. Knowing that he was still alive was enough for her to live her days out in peace. But she couldn't. All she could do was smile with tears in her eyes. As Jango stood, he felt his knees get weak. The blood had been cut off for over an hour. It took him a moment to get feeling back in his feet, but in no time he was fully upright. Alpha heard the room go silent and took it as his cue to enter. He approached Arla's armor. "She wants you to have this, Master Fett." Jango felt a lump in his throat. "I don't accept it. You're going to need it for when I get back with the cure." Arla shook her head no, but again Jango refused the armor. Before exiting the room, Jango placed his helmet back on his head. The door slid open and there stood Satine on the other side. "Have you been waiting here this whole time?" Satine gave a sorrowed smile. "Yes, Mandalore Fett. I needed to be here for you." Jango gave a curious look. Satine responded immediately. "Don't even think that. This is a rough time for you and your sister, and I'm here for my Mandalore." Jango gestured to the exit with his hand. Satine walked out, and Jango followed her. Almec sat in his cell, stewing. His thoughts of hate toward the Darmanda Fett crowded his mind. How could this impostor perceive he has any power, let alone the gumption to detain the Prime Minister of Mandalore? Almec's delusions allowed him to believe he had been helping maintain Mandalore all this time. He had better watch himself. He may end up like his sister, or worse, Adonai Kreese. He spoke the words aloud, and just as the words spewed their hate out of his mouth, the glass cell door opened and a guard stepped in. Almec?" Almec interrupted. "Prime Minister Almec." The guard sighed. "Whatever. Your presence is being requested by Mandalore Fett and Duchess Satine Kreese. Come with me." Almec grumbled under his breath. This time, his words were inaudible. Satine and Jango awaited Almec's arrival in Jango's office chamber. "Mandalore Fett," Jango interrupted. "Call me Jango." Satine spoke again. "As you wish. Jango, this is a gesture of good faith. Freeing Almec will help strengthen the relations between you and the people. The Mandalorian people like Almec, and they trust him. He may be stubborn, but he will make a good ally to have, once he trusts you." Jango didn't say anything in return. If she could see under his helmet or hear his thoughts, she would know that he didn't care about political allies, especially that of a pacifist who didn't help his Mandalore in battle. And a Mandalore who has proven himself in battle isn't someone who should worry whether one cowardice politician will trust him. Almec may be stubborn, but Jango's a warrior. As the guard ushered Almec into the room, there was never a thought as to whether he should tell Jango and Satine of what he overheard outside Almec's cell. Jango ordered the guard to remove the binders around Almec's wrists. Once removed, Almec faced the guard. "Thank you," and gave him a smile. The guard asked if his assistance was further needed, to which Satine gestured for him to leave with a slight motion of her hand. Over the next few minutes, Jango laid out Almec's fate. He told Almec of the dissolution of his title and that he would remain on as an advisor on his council. He also informed him that if there were any other disrespect to him, that he would not hesitate to execute him, or anyone else. Almec did put up an argument, but tried to act as respectful as he could. Act. That's the key word. Choosing his words wisely, until finally Jango had enough of what he saw as entertainment. He asked Almec, "Do you agree with my terms?" Satine gave Almec a look as to say, "Shut up and do it." Almec looked back at Jango, who had not removed his helmet once. "Yes, Mandalore Fett." Jango then motioned for Almec to leave. Jango wished he could smile beneath the helmet, but he didn't feel Almec was sincere. In fact, he knew he wasn't. The only reason he didn't kill Almec where he stood was because Satine would have lost faith in him, and, with her, most likely the Mandalorian people. Jango despised politics. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. It's simple. Little did he know, he was playing the political game already, but Satine was more stubborn than Almec. But now that this was set in motion, Jango knew he would have to keep an eye on Almec. He told Satine as much. He also told her there's something else behind him, something he's hiding even from her. Almec was treacherous, and he had seen this before with Montross. He tried explaining that to Satine, but she was stubborn. She trusted Almec completely. What a shame. Jango felt Almec would be the death of both of them. All Jango could think was, I should have executed him. To say Count Dooku was taking Senator Palpatine's advice under careful consideration was an understatement. It took him a standard month to agree to even talk to the fledgling senator. In that time, he was contacted by Newt Gunray of the Trade Federation. The Viceroy had told Dooku of what happened with Naboo and how a Sith Lord had used him and his small army. The trade disputes was a topic Dooku was all too familiar with. But what really caught his attention was the mention of a Sith Lord. It was puzzling for sure. The Sith had been killed off for 1,000 years. But the Force works in mysterious ways. As Newt babbled on, Dooku's mind wandered. If the Jedi couldn't help him, no, that's an impossible thought. When Dooku started paying attention to what the Viceroy was saying again, Gunray started making sense. An alliance. Both the Trade Federation and Serenno were being ignored by the Galactic Senate. Their goods and resources were being devoured by them without a care about the preservation of their people. Dooku had minor dealings with the Trade Federation in the past, and there's one thing he knew for sure. They were cowards. They created a droid army because they didn't have the numbers to make up an organic army. Even if they had the numbers, they wouldn't do anything to put themselves in harm's way. Still, this was the only backing he was presented with. As cowardly as the members of the Trade Federation were, they had an army. Not that he was considering war, but if he were to indulge the idea of a separation from the Republic, there would be unintended consequences. And that's exactly what Newt Gunray was proposing. But to think of war was laughable at best. The Republic only had a small security force. Sure, the Jedi were keepers of the peace, but wouldn't permit their ranks to get involved in a civil war, where they had to decide if their loyalty was to the Republic or well-being of the entire galaxy. War was the last thing anyone wanted. Office work. It was something that Jango Fett wasn't made for. This wasn't covered in his training by Jaster Muriel, and he'd never seen Jaster doing paperwork, unless it was planning a strategy on a topographical hologram map of terrain they were about to enter. This was boring, he thought. Not at all what a Mandalorian leader should be doing. The only decrees he had issued were that of the position of Prime Minister being dissolved, and that Mandalorians had to be honorable and take on honorable professions if so allowed. No more conquest and no more killing for the sake of expansion. Those were old ideals that had become outdated. Still, Satine and her pacifists despised conflict of any form, even if bounty hunting or being a private security. He couldn't win with this group. He was feeling more and more out of place with every passing day. The confines of the city were getting to him, and the people he was leading seemed stacked against him. Satine was his only friend, and even her aid to him was limited by her own ideals. Ideals, he thought. What happened to the ideals he was taught? Honor, duty, a strong security to their clans, following their mandalore. He wasn't asking them to go to war or spread fear to other systems. He felt like he was sitting and waiting for something bad to happen, and he wasn't wrong. To free himself from the mundane political life, Jango had taken on bounty hunting privately as a way of proving he still had it in him and keep himself fresh. He conducted his business in private, not because he was ashamed or afraid of repercussions, but because he had to stay active and needed an effective exit strategy if things were to go south on Mandalore. While sitting in his office, he got up from his desk and walked over to the window. From here he could see the landing platform that his ship was docked. Memories began flooding back to him. The ship was a reminder of everything he had been through, everything he had lost. He would replace any one of his council members with anyone from his old team. It wasn't Jango Fett alone that made the true Mandalorians great. It was everyone. They were united, and in most ways a family. Silas, Miles, me, Regan, all better than anyone in his council. They were out for the greater whole of Mandalorian society. These sniveling politicians here were out for their own self-interests. The only one of his true Mandalorians that he had compared them to was Montross Vizsla. But he remained optimistic. Mandalorians are a great people, strong, smart, and he would put them against any invading army with a certainty that victory was imminent, so long as they would lose the pacifist mindset. Suddenly, the door to his office slid open. It seemed to open more dramatically than any other time. In steps Almec with no fewer than 6 guards, all in Death Watch blue and gray. Apparently, the word that they would be granted asylum had reached them. Jango Fett, you are under arrest for the crime of treason against the Mandalorian people and the disappearance of Duke Adonai Kreese. Guards, cuff him. Jango didn't have time to react in a surprised manner. His instincts kicked in immediately. It was all too reminiscent of being captured by the Jedi. These guards should have been prepared for Jango. His blasters were always at his side. He was always in full armor. Jango Fett was always prepared, and unfortunately for the guards, they were not. With the years that Death Watch was in hiding, they became soft. Before the guards could even reach Jango, he had his pistols drawn. He had managed to stun each of them with only Almec standing. Other than Almec's threat of incarceration, no other words had been spoken before this moment. Councilman Almec, I charge you with treason against your Mandalore. Lay down your weapon and submit peacefully, or we can go the other route. In return, Almec laughs. You are Darmanda. You have no rights. Jango smiles beneath his helmet. Then we do this my way. Jango doesn't want a quick, easy solution by stunning him, so he holsters his blasters and leaps at the aging man. Almec has underestimated Jango. He didn't pay attention to the stories of Jango taking down Jedi with his bare hands, mostly because that's something any trained Mandalorian should be able to accomplish. Almec puts up a good fight, one of the best Jango had been in recently. It gave Jango a sense of relief that not all Mandalorians had become soft. But Jango was able to subdue Almec just before more guards had arrived. Jango knew he could keep this up, probably longer than they could, but it would be pointless. If he won this confrontation, where would he go from there? It was apparent he was no longer welcome on Mandalore. Just then, Almec gave him an easy out of this situation. You have no choice, Jango. Either you give up, or you leave this place, never to return. Jango thought about it. Exile. Either self-imposed exile or lead a world that no longer wanted him. He felt just as Montross must have felt when he was in the same situation. Only he had made connections through bounty hunting and knew he could survive on his own. As Jango was escorted to his slave one, Almec taunted him from behind. Jango paid it no mind. It wasn't worth losing the respect of the rest of Mandalore or his own self-respect, if there was any left at all. He knew he could return one day if he wanted to, but if this is what Mandalore had become, he wasn't so sure. If he were to get himself into a situation that had endangered his own life, he had no heir to teach the way of the Mandalore to. This was disappointing, to say the least. How could he have fought so hard for Mandalore, yet be treated like a common criminal? But he was Jango Fett, leader of the true Mandalorians, who had ended the Civil War and vanquished the murderous Death Watch. It was time to go. So Jango put it all in the back of his mind and left Mandalore behind him, a Mandalorian in exile. Okay, that's it for part 1 of the last chapter. For some reason, YouTube wouldn't upload the entire video, so I split it into 2 parts. I've linked the second part of the end of this in the description below. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're new here, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button to see more great Star Wars content on the fastest growing Star Wars YouTube channel around. Leave a like and share the video with some friends. Thank you for watching, and remember, this is the way, the only way.